this is a note I received from Steve Bannon, which says very simply, my name, Trump 2028, and is signed. This came with this hat. And I mentioned this now. He sent this a few weeks back, and I didn't mention it in our coverage, and I don't think we should always over-respond to these types of things or trolling. But now that the president is again discussing an illegal third term, the Speaker of the House, Republican Mike Johnson, dismissed it and said there's no path to that, which is fact-checked true. Legally, there is no path. And this is all back in the news. I want to discuss that as sort of my second topic in this breakdown. Again, just looking at some notes I wanted to share with you guys. The first thing politically that we have to keep in mind is what is true and what the goals are. So if somebody is trying to trick, or the word of the year now, troll you, and you care about truth and evidence, what's really going on politically? Before we even get to the obvious constitutional fact that you can't run for a third term. And I think first is Steve Bannon, who's someone that I've interviewed and reported on and dealt with, is a political communicator. That's something he prides himself on. And he continues to bring up the idea that Trump could be something other than a lame duck. And I say it that way because even before, again, the law, Bannon, who was the leader of the homestretch victorious 2016 campaign, who's been in and out of the White House, may be doing something that is more political than practical here. Meaning, whether or not you get to an attempt to hold power past 2028, which you have to take seriously given everything going on, and I'll get to that. First, you have to look at what is often called in political science the Overton window, which a lot of people know about, but it's basically the idea that if this is the realm of what is accepted, sort of traditional or conventional ideas in political debate, and boy has that changed lately, but if this is the idea that you want to go and shoot out of that, you want to be putting ideas over here to expand the window of what's acceptable. And any side could do that. I mean, as a communications tactic, it's actually neutral, that you could do that around this conservative idea that you want taxes not only low, you want taxes to go to zero. Well, no government runs on zero taxes, but just as an example, you could start pushing that idea and get that out there in people's heads, so that the negotiation you do offer sounds maybe more rational to some or less extreme than the zero, right? That's just the window. You could do a liberal example, whatever. Here we're talking about something very serious. We're talking about people who were caught trying to overthrow the 2020 election, who were in some cases criminally indicted and convicted. In other cases, we didn't get to trial. Donald Trump in our legal system was never tried on those matters because he actually won re-election when he ran again, as you know, in 24. So in all fairness, some of those were adjudicated, some weren't. But we're dealing with people from Trump on down who did try to overthrow the 2020 election. So when they talk about other plots to mess with the outcome of elections or break laws, we're not starting at neutral. We're starting from the inference of they've done this before, tried it, plotted. But before we get to that, in the Overton window, Donald Trump constitutionally, legally, is a lame duck. Midterms are this year. Maybe he'll do well and he'll be an empowered lame duck, but his time is still running out. And if you look all throughout history, lame duck, when you are headed towards the end of your power as a president, tends to be when you become less relevant. The Congress and others are serving in different terms. Senators are doing 6-year terms. A president who's approaching his last 3, 2, 1 year left is dealing with people who already are very much looking past him. And so politically, there is clearly an effort to make Trump seem like he's going to last longer, expand his power. There's also efforts to do that by abusing power, and we can report on that. I cover that a lot. If you're watching, you probably know about that. But if this is a communications tactic, even introducing the very idea that something illegal that can't happen in a democracy like ours is possible, plausible, that expands it. And then you could imagine if he wants some other thing, some other role past 2028, which I'll talk about in a minute, suddenly that sounds like, according to Bannon's pitch, a middle ground from going all the way out here to the idea that we would end democracy and our constitutional rule. So that's number one. You're normalizing other options if you allow that to happen. And so while we've seen this tactic before, you say something's a joke or you let an outside person float it, then you take it back. It's very unpopular if you tell Americans that you don't respect their vote and you want to end democracy, even for those who are very loyal to Trump on other issues. And so we've seen the limits of that. Trump keeps having people basically float this, then back off it. At one point it was a joke, at another point it's an outside advisor, but it keeps coming up. And so I think that's one part of it. And I mention this because Mr. Bannon sent this to me, and I presume, I don't know who else he sent it to, but he's talking to reporters. He most recently talked to The Economist about it. He's using different methods to put this out there, to normalize and launder these ideas. Trump obviously likes doing that. He puts the hats out when he's meeting with Democrats and other things in the Oval Office. And so that's a bit of the strategy part. The fact that they were caught trying to hold on to power and overthrow the 2020 election is the context for all of this. And I got to tell you, just being clear here in the breakdowns I share, I find it really extraordinary sometimes how the country lived through this insurrection. It became the biggest federal probe in our history. And all these people went to...
Iranian state television is reporting that according to a draft memo, the U.S. will end its blockade of Iran's ports. And in return, Iran will restore the number of commercial ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz to pre-war levels soon. CNN's Oren Lieberman joins us now from Jerusalem with the latest. Oren, what are you learning about this draft memo being reported on Iranian state television?
Linda, this is our first sense of what's in the memorandum of understanding that's being worked on between the U.S. and Iran to try to get to a ceasefire agreement. It is important to note that this information comes from Iranian state television, so we don't yet have confirmation of this from the U.S. side. And crucially, even Iranian state television says this isn't finalized yet. But it does include a lot of what the U.S. is looking for in terms of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian state television says the memorandum of understanding, or MOU, calls for the U.S. to lift its blockade of Iranian ports and for U.S. military forces to withdraw from the vicinity of Iran, and in exchange, Iran would open the Strait of Hormuz and ensure that traffic through the crucial waterway is back to pre-war levels within 1 month. All that according to Iranian state television. Now, that's not it. In terms of monitoring the flow of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, through which some 1/5 of the world's water flows, through which 1/5 of the world's crude oil flows, it would be up to Iran working with Oman to monitor and control that traffic, according to Iranian state television. That in and of itself may be unacceptable to the U.S. because that, in a way, leaves the Strait of Hormuz under partial Iranian sovereignty, and that, of course, has been a red line for the U.S. Now, Iranian state TV says this is still in the works, it's still being negotiated, and it's not finalized, but Pakistan is mediating between the U.S. and Iran to try to get to some sort of agreement here. Now, there's a lot we don't know here. According to Iranian state television, it calls for the U.S. to withdraw forces from the vicinity of Iran. What exactly does that mean? Iran has called for the U.S. to withdraw forces from the broader Middle East. I think that's clearly not going to happen, so a lot depends on how Iran defines its vicinity and whether the U.S. would even see it as acceptable that Iran and Oman are left monitoring and controlling traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. But this is a look at the MOU that's in the works here to try to get to a broader ceasefire agreement to end this war and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Linda, we have seen a trickle of traffic flowing through the strait. I believe there were about 24 ships, or 25 ships that went through yesterday. That's still a fraction of pre-war traffic.
And Oren, we know that the U.S. president is set to host a cabinet meeting discussing Iran in the coming hours. Do we know what exactly the U.S. will accept, and who is negotiating on behalf of the U.S. right now?
In the end, it's almost certainly simply up to President Donald Trump himself. What is he willing to accept as part of an agreement here? Now, the red lines he's drawn are no highly enriched uranium remaining in Iran and trying to essentially end the nuclear program. Now, that's not in this. Iran has, through the means of this MOU and its other negotiations, pushed that off to a later phase of negotiations. So it's really up to Trump in terms of what he would accept. Pakistan has been mediating here. We've seen Vice President J.D. Vance be a part of this, as well as envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
Let's bring in Ali Fayez, who is the Iran Projector Director for the International Crisis Group. Appreciate your time today.
Good to be with you.
So I want to get your reaction first to the Iran.
A new controversy is gaining traction after reports surfaced that Steve Bannon sent out Trump 2028 merchandise, reviving discussion around an idea that legally has no path forward, a third presidential term for Donald Trump. The renewed attention comes as Trump himself once again makes comments suggesting the possibility, even while top Republicans, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, have publicly stated that there is no legal route available. On that point, the Constitution is clear. The law is not ambiguous. The 22nd Amendment limits presidents to 2 elected terms, but the legal reality is only one piece of the conversation. The bigger issue is understanding what may actually be happening politically. Because before asking whether Trump can legally run for a third term, he cannot under current law, there is another question: why keep raising the idea at all? Steve Bannon has always understood political messaging, whether people agree with him or not. Communication itself has long been one of his strongest tools. He has repeatedly suggested that Trump should be viewed as something more than a lame duck president, and that matters politically. A lame duck president is a leader serving the final period of power with no future presidential election ahead. Historically, presidents in that position gradually lose influence. Congress starts looking toward future leadership. Party figures begin planning for what comes next. Attention shifts away. But if people can be persuaded that Trump's influence extends beyond the constitutional end date, that changes the perception of power. Political scientists often talk about something called the Overton window. The idea is simple. Society has a range of ideas considered normal or acceptable in public debate. If you introduce more extreme ideas into the discussion, even if those ideas never become reality, you can shift the boundaries of what people view as reasonable. Imagine somebody argues taxes should be completely eliminated. Nobody expects government to operate on zero taxes. But by introducing the extreme position, suddenly a much smaller reduction appears moderate by comparison. The tactic itself isn't inherently ideological. Any side can use it. But here the issue is more serious because it concerns constitutional limits and democratic systems. Because discussions about extending presidential power are not happening in a vacuum. Trump and individuals around him were involved in efforts to challenge the 2020 election outcome. Some of those efforts resulted in criminal cases against people involved. Some matters were adjudicated, others never reached trial. Trump himself returned to office after winning another election, altering the legal path that had been unfolding. But regardless of where individual legal cases ended, the broader reality remains that attempts were made to overturn election results. So when conversations emerge again about alternative methods of remaining in power, people naturally view them through that existing context. We're not starting from neutral ground. We're starting from prior events, and that changes the way these discussions are interpreted. Now consider what repeatedly introducing a third-term discussion accomplishes politically. Even if everyone involved knows it cannot happen, simply placing the idea into public debate expands the range of what people become accustomed to hearing. Maybe the goal isn't literally a third term. Maybe it's another arrangement, maybe another structure of power, maybe something else entirely. Once an extreme proposal enters discussion, alternative proposals can suddenly appear more reasonable simply because they're positioned beside something even more dramatic. We've seen this pattern before. An idea gets floated, then somebody says it was just a joke, then another person says it was merely hypothetical, then another advisor raises it, then the discussion fades, then it comes back again. And gradually something once considered unthinkable starts feeling familiar. That process itself matters, because public familiarity often changes political reactions, and context matters here. January 6th wasn't simply another political disagreement. It became one of the largest federal investigations in American history. Individuals were convicted of crimes ranging from assaulting police officers to seditious conspiracy. Trump later issued pardons for many involved. Sometimes it feels like the country collectively experienced something enormously significant and then quickly moved on. Maybe because people became exhausted, maybe because new controversies constantly emerge, maybe because many simply want normalcy, but January 6th remains part of the backdrop for every discussion involving presidential power, because history matters, and some ideas that once sounded impossible have already been attempted before. Consider some of the proposals pursued after the 2020 election, and